Hey guys, Public back with another video, and today we're going to talk about the spec tree for Shadow inside of Dragonflight. Had a lot of changes come in recently on this tree. I just went over the class tree in the previous video, and today we're going to go over the spec tree. So if you haven't seen the class tree video, make sure you check that out. Kind of sets up for kind of a nice base spec of what we have access to. In general, I think the spec tree is also generally going in a positive direction, although there's so many ideas happening at once that are kind of colliding together with our spec tree that I think it just needs to be cleaned up a little bit, or needs to be kind of reined in some. There are still quite a lot of choices in the tree, so hopefully we have some time to keep iterating on it. But without further ado, let's get into the tree and kind of go over every row. Okay, so first things first, it's quite of a different setup now than we had before. So now you just start off with Devouring Plague, so you just get Mind Flay, kind of baseline part of the kit now. You're not talenting into Vampiric Touch anymore either, so that's gone from this kind of opening row. And the tree kind of gives you two initial choices here between Silence and Mindseer. You will almost certainly always have to pick up Shadowy Apparitions because that's just kind of baseline damage. But the good news is, if you're just talking about single target damage, you're not obligated anymore to pick Silence or Mindseer to get access to other things that you might really need, because Shadowy Apparitions just connects directly below them. So what you are missing out on these to pick up Psychic Horror or the Last Word Improved Silence, you do need to pick up Silence before that. And then with Dispersion, you do need to pick up Dispersion to pick up Intangibility, which is additional healing on Dispersion and getting that kind of max health over its duration and reducing its cooldown. Or Mental Fortitude, which is moved from the bottom of the tree up here and now is extra shielding from Devouring Plague as well. So definitely some nice utility here. So we do have a bit less utility in this kind of top section of the tree than we had before. Although there are still quite a lot of nodes in our tree in general, meaning we really don't have too much freedom still to pick up Silence or Dispersion. If they just removed a handful of nodes from the tree in general, that would free us up to more easily pick up Silence and Dispersion. But right now, you can basically just kind of get one, maybe two, depending on some new talents that aren't implemented yet. But otherwise, it's still going to be kind of tricky. So if they just remove a couple of these nodes that I don't think we'll need, we'll get to those in a second, that would open this up a bit nicer, in my opinion. So we've taken Shadow Apparitions. You're probably going to want to take this next guy as well. So you get to pick between Auspicious Spirits, which is your apparitions hit harder and generate insanity now. Or you pick Tormented Spirits, which says Shadowed Pain has a chance to spawn apparitions. So you're kind of choosing, do you want to buff your existing set of apparitions and make them give you insanity? Or if you're like insanity overloaded or your damage is coming elsewhere, you can just pick to get more apparitions in general. So they're kind of making it that choice of like, you know, do you want more apparitions or do you want them to hit harder kind of thing, which I think is a really good choice. It's also really nice from like a scaling perspective. So if you're a Mythic Plus and you're flooded with insanity, maybe you don't want Auspicious Spirits. Maybe you just spawn more apparitions just to get better passive damage out, right? Obviously, the tuning of this, I'm assuming Tormented Spirits is more damage than just 15% from Auspicious Spirits. You know, if it's not like that, I'm sure that they will tune it because that's kind of where this makes sense. The other big thing to call out, all of the 4 idle spells we had before are still here. So if you're picking up Idol of Yogg-Saron down here, which benefits the more apparitions you spawn, it would make sense that you're probably going to want to pick up Tormented Spirits to get Idol of Yogg-Saron to proc faster than you would otherwise. It's a nice, interesting choice to know right off the bat here. And then at the top, you get to pick between Misery or Dark Void. Misery is largely the same, although it does give you a bit extra Shadowed Pain dot damage than we have currently on live, which is for Shadowed Pain, so that's nice. Or you pick up Dark Void. It's a 30-second cooldown, casted spell that generates insanity, similar to what we had in BFA. And it applies, it's a small damaging spell, and then applies Shadowed Pain to 8 nearby enemies. So it's unfortunately target capped. And the other kind of awkwardness is it's a 30-second cooldown, but Shadowed Pain's dot duration is, I think it's like 16 or 18, something like that. So it's not the full duration of, like, Shadowed Pain will expire if you do nothing else. There are some ways and some talents down the road that can extend Shadowed Pain, but in general, it's kind of underwhelming, I think, as an option. Would prefer it to be uncapped and or the cooldown reduced based on that. So we'll see what happens though. For most cases, Misery is going to make the most sense, I think. And then going down to row 4. So it says Shadow Orbs here, We don't quite know what this means yet. Obviously, we've had lots of different iterations of Shadow Orbs, but this guy and then 2 following it are all coming soon, not yet implemented. So we're going to have to wait and see what these guys are. Don't want to speculate too much on what they could be, but just know that we have some more stuff coming. Kind of shows you that they're still working on this and seeing what they can do. You can then choose between Hallucinations, which is what we have as the current passive, or Tithe Evasion, which is moved from the class tree, now reduces damage of Shadow or Death by 75% less damage to you, the caster. Definitely a massive upgrade, definitely needed, because Shadow or Death hits so hard. I think in general, I'd actually love to see this or some iteration of this choice node just to get moved to the class tree, to be honest with you. Obviously, like, the Healer Priests don't need the Insanity from Hallucinations. They could just make that just be those things cost less mana for those specs. But I think putting Tithe Evasion over there would make more sense, especially because it is going to, picking this means you're giving up some damage, right? So yeah, we'll see on that guy. Mind Spike is coming back, so you definitely want to talent into Mind Spike. It's going to be kind of a new core part of the spec, and we'll kind of talk about why in a little bit. So baseline, it does extinguish all of your dots, so all 3 of them. But every time you cast it, increases the critical strike chance of your next Mind Blast by 30%, stacking up to 3 times. So this is what I mentioned earlier. If you do use this, depending on how you use this, you can kind of get a guaranteed crit depending on the rotation, which would kind of enable Apathy to kind of slow a bit more. But in practice, that rotation is going to be hard to get up there. And again, you'd be removing quite a lot of dots mostly when this happens. So not quite sure how I feel about this as a combination. I think Apathy generally is underwhelming without this, but obviously it's pretty niche, so we'll see. Then you can still pick up Vampiric Insight, so this is still the kind of redesigned Dark Thoughts that we had before. Now, it does still say that Mind Blast grants 1 additional charge. They did say in the blue post that they were going to remove this, although my initial feedback with playing with it, I really think we need this 1 charge in the spec. Playing with 2 charges of Mind Blast outside of Void form just feels so much better. Anytime you only have 1 charge of Mind Blast, you can just get, like, you feel like you're wasting cooldowns too much, and it just doesn't feel great to play with. So I hope they reconsider that and give us that extra charge baseline. I think they were probably concerned because giving that 1 extra charge flat all the time means that you have 1 extra than you should in Void form. Meaning when you popped Void form before, you'd have 3 charges of Mind Blast, which is far, far too much. So I think as a compromise, would love to see it come back, but only for non-Void form. That way, we have 2 charges all the time. I think that'd be a great change. So here's what I was saying before. We do have some room to pick some points before we can move down. This obviously will depend on the strength of Shadow Orbs and kind of what this is. For the sake of the argument, I'm going to assume Shadow Orbs deals damage to show my point. You only have 1 spare point now in this section to pick up Mind Seer if you need to AoE, which is now an Insanity Spender and not an Insanity Generator. It's definitely kind of a reworked version of our AoE in this build. So if you're dungeoning, boom, there's your build, which means you missed out on Silence and Dispersion. If it is a single target encounter, you can just pick up Dispersion right there. Probably going to be what you want from like a rating perspective. But yeah, I wish there was a couple things that could move or move around, remove that kind of thing, that we have some more freedom of what we can pick here without feeling like we're still losing Silence or something else like that, right? And that's this kind of top section. So let's go on to the middle section of the row. So like I said, there's still some not yet implemented stuff, so unsure what this is going to be. Damnation's still back, no changes there. Now, the base proc that comes off of Mind Spike is very important. It's called Surge of Darkness. So this gives Vampiric Touch and Devouring Plague damage a chance to cause your next Mind Spike to not consume your dots. It also makes it instant cast and deal more damage. This stacks up to 3 times. So you can kind of see a quick little gameplay loop here of you only want to use Mind Spike when you get this proc. Because otherwise removing our dots doesn't work well with our mastery or the rest of our kit. So for most things, it seems like they're trying to be like, well, you have Mind Spike, it removes your dots, but we really only want you to use it when you get these procs. I think it's kind of meant to be a filler-esque type thing that does slightly more damage than Mind Flay without a proc. But with the proc, there's no downsides to pressing it. You definitely want to hit it. So it's kind of our gameplay loop. And obviously, if you stack this up to 3 times, you can use 3 Mind Spikes in a row, which then makes your next Mind Blast crit 90% more likely. So there's a bit of a loop there, although there are quite a lot of buffs to manage in that process. Okay, so then we also have Mind Melt, which Mind Spike reduces the cast time of your next Mind Blast by 50%, stacking 2 times. So if you cast a few of these in a row, not only does your Mind Blast likely crit, but the cast time is also instant. Initial feedback here, just right off the bat, this feels a little overcomplicating things. Mind Melt is very similar to Vampiric Insight as a proc, although a bit less useful. I think what I'd rather see is just this talent just makes Mind Spike have a chance to give you a Vampiric Insight proc. I think just something like a flat chance like that would also help close the loop on Vampiric Insight, rather than getting 2 different buffs that can separately reduce the cast time of Mind Blast. I don't know, it's just kind of strange to me. Then you also have Mental Decay here, which is a very, very cool talent. Duration of your Shadow Word Pain and Vamp Touch is increased by 1 second when enemies suffer Mind Flay or Mind Sear damage. So, notably, Mind Sear isn't a filler anymore, but will still be pressing as part of our AoE rotation to dump Insanity. So during that, in AoE, in single target, your dots will be kind of passively refreshed by your filler spells, which kind of means you're less reliant on having Void Eruption, having Void Form, and therefore having Void Bolt to sustain your dots. You can kind of do that naturally without that as a cooldown. So this kind of enables that as a playstyle. And then the kind of last thing in this section is Dark Evangelism, which is a kind of a returning play style that the spec has had in the past, where Mind Flay and Mind Sear damage, it gives you a stacking buff that increases the damage of your periodic shadow effects, which is things like, obviously, dot damage like Shadow Word Pain, Devouring Plague. Periodic damage effects is also Mind Flay ticks, Void Torrent ticks, things like that. So there is quite a lot of periodic stuff in our kit, as a lot of you guys know, and that stacks up to 5 times. So you get a total of 10% damage buff that lasts for 25 seconds, I believe. So this does mean you do kind of need to press Mind Flay once every 25 seconds. So that part is a little not my favorite, but I think in general it's pretty safe to say you'll do that kind of naturally anyways. Although in cooldowns it'll be a little different. So that is this section of the row. Mind Melt, probably something you want to pick up as well, but we'll see. Not super required because it's just cast time, so it is some damage, but not a ton. And then coming down to the next row, we have Unfurling Darkness is making its return. Kind of just feels like it was kind of thrown in here. It's not something that really, we're gonna need. Obviously, it does have good synergy with Misery if you picked it up. Can easily dot 2 targets and get that burst of damage on that other one. But honestly, it's kind of just something you'll pick up in PvP. The point and kind of what it's competing with, I don't think will make sense otherwise. So maybe they move it out. I would just remove it out of the tree, put it in PvP talents or something, but that's just my 2 cents. And then you can come over here to Dark Ascension, which is a new 2-minute cooldown that consumes your Dark Evangelism stacks that you were bringing up here before, and then increases the damage of your non-periodic shadow spells by 4% per stack consumed, lasting 18 seconds. So if this is fully stacked up, you get 5 stacks, which means you get a 20% buff to your non-periodic spells, which is Mind Spike, Mind Blast, Void Bolt, Devouring Plague's instant damage, Shadow Word Pain's instant damage, that kind of stuff, as well as other kind of spells like Mind Games, Shadow Word Death, Shadow Crash, all those kind of spells, Divine Star, things like that. So it's a very interesting playstyle. You have this buff outside your cooldowns that's buffing your dots, and then for this 18-second window, you're kind of like, boom, instant target damage, which kind of reprioritizes what you want to think about. So really interesting, especially how that then plays with Mind Spike, and if you maybe don't care about dropping some dots inside of Dark Ascension window. Although the issue with that is we are still spending Insanity on a dot. So there is some kind of anti-synergy anyways with like Mind Spike removing our kind of main Insanity spender during this cooldown window. There is a talent that kind of offsets this a little bit, which we'll get to in just a second. But that's our new 2-minute cooldown. So very, very interesting. Then they added a choice node between Void Torrent or Shadow Crash, which does make sense. I don't think you'd ever want both in most situations. Unfortunately, Void Torrent doesn't really feel like it fits here. It feels kind of out of place now. It obviously is a super thematic spell, but doesn't really interact with anything. They buffed Mind Flay in all these different ways of like Mind Flay's refreshing dots and stacking Dark Evangelism. Void Torrent doesn't get either of that, so it is kind of losing a little bit in the sense of like our filler is doing things that this isn't, even though they're both kind of channeled spells. Would appreciate if Void Torrent was added to those lists as well, just to make it make more sense to use. Otherwise, I'm not sure it makes sense in its current iteration to be on the tree. Now, Shadow Crash has also received a change. Shadow Crash now also applies Vampiric Touch to 4 of the targets that it hits. So it still damages everything, but applies Vampiric Touch to 4 of them. And I believe in my testing it was prioritizing targets that didn't already have Vampiric Touch as part of that group. So let's say you have 6 targets and 4 of them already have Vampiric Touch and you cast Shadow Crash. It will refresh 2 of them and then cast Vampiric Touch on the 2 without. Basically how that would work. So unfortunately, it is target capped to only be 4 targets with Vamp Touch, which isn't my favorite. Although again, keep in mind with Mental Decay, you can kind of sustain dots. So after the second Shadow Crash that you cast, you could theoretically finish dotting. But honestly, the target count feels really low in coordination with its cooldown. It is reduced by haste, I believe, still. But honestly, I just wish it was uncapped. I feel like that would make way more sense. It's going to be a little awkward to play with. The good news is this does work with Misery. So because we have Misery talented and Shadow Crash is applying Vampiric Touch, it also applies Shadow Word Pain. So you basically have a little crash that will apply all of your dots, or both of your dots, sorry, not Devouring Plague, to 4 targets. So I don't know, that interaction is nice, but I still wish the dots were not target capped, because it is still an 8-yard range, so it's a pretty tight clump anyways. So I don't know, I'm kind of disappointed with that. Other things we have here, you still have Psychic Link that you can pick up. Kind of a lot of options here. You can see I didn't take Damnation or Mind Melt, can still pick it up quite easily if that's the kind of fight we want to go for. And then kind of on this left-hand side, you have the Damnation cooldown reduction, as well as a new talent, Maddening Touch, which is kind of an off kind of play on what we had in the past. Vampiric Touch has a 50% chance, I guess we'll go over here, or 100% chance to generate 1 insanity each time it deals damage. So obviously in single target, your Vamp Touch isn't ticking as often, so that insanity gain is not that much. But in AoE, if you have a bunch of Vampiric Touches out, this can add up quite quickly. And I suspect this is there to offset. Mind Sphere isn't there to generate insanity for us anymore, so we needed something to kind of give us more passive insanity, especially in AoE, which is kind of what this talent feels like it's aimed at. But single target, not really feeling like anything over here that we'd like. The issue with that is kind of on this left-hand side, you are kind of missing out then on picking up Mindbender. Remember, Shadow Fiend is now baseline, which has a baseline 3-minute cooldown. Not that exciting, but it's something. You can upgrade that to Mindbender here, or you can choose to get Idol of Yasharj instead, which works the same way it did before, so no changes here. You can see my previous video on idols and the problems with those idol spells. All of that is still valid here. They were not changed. So kind of a weird change, meaning if you want Idol of Yasharj, that means you're taking it with Shadow Fiend. I don't know, it just feels kind of weird and doesn't make a whole lot of sense in our kit. You can take the talent below it, which is Fiending Dark, which makes Mind Flay and Mind Spike crits, reduce the cooldown of Shadow Fiend by 3 seconds, or cooldown of Mindbender by 1 second. So it's very proportional to their original cooldowns. So you can cast these pets more often than before, but I don't know, just kind of a pet that we summon to give us more insanity. I don't know. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, so it feels a little lame to me that we have all these talents to invest in a base cooldown by itself that isn't exciting, just to make it somewhat do something interactive. I'd rather the cooldown just not exist or make some of the stuff baseline to make it just better, but it's just my 2 cents. So Shadowflare Prism is coming back. Obviously, it's not something that everyone is the most excited about. It is kind of in a weird section of the tree, like to get down here. Obviously, we'll see what the kind of Shadow Orbs option are that could change my mind, but they are kind of leaning towards this is the AoE-ish side of the tree, with Shadowflame Prism being that kind of capstone 5-target thing. So we'll see how that works out. I think the pathing is still a little weird about, well, this side is kind of AoE. We don't know what the Shadow Orb stuff is yet. Damnation is very single target, yet it's over here. There are some AoE options, like Idol of N'Zoth is on the other side. So I'm not quite sure what their goal is, or like there doesn't feel to be like a clear design in the kind of bottom left section of the tree. Now, if we move on to the middle section, we have Whispers of the Damned here, which your Mind Blast and Mind Spike crits generate an additional insanity. And if you remember, we do have Mind Spike that does passively increase the crit strike of the Mind Blast. So there is, again, a lot of stuff kind of playing off of our crits. So getting a lot more crit scaling added into our kit here, which feels fun. And then there's also this really, really strange talent called Piercing Shadows. Your shadow spell casts increase your shadow damage by 0.5% for 25 seconds, stacks up to 5 times. And if you talent it into it, it's actually 1%. So it's a 5% damage increase for 25 seconds. This buff is up all the time. Once you cast 5 spells, it's just active the rest of the fight. This just feels like they needed some talent here to pad out our kit, but honestly really doesn't feel like it fits at all with what's happening. And you don't interact with anything here. They're just basically saying, here's 5% more damage. I don't know. This feels overkill. I understand that you need to kind of pad out the tree, but we still have a lot of points in our tree. I don't think we need the additional padding. Would rather get something else here or just get a straight line out of here to other things, honestly. So a little disappointed with that. And obviously you're going to pick that up if you're just talking about like doing single target damage. We have some free points here before we get down to the next section, 2 specifically. So this is probably going to end up being some combination of maybe you want Psychic Link for this fight, single targety, probably going to want just to get Damnation and Damnation cooldown. Although depending on what the Shadow Orb stuff is, you could get that as well before coming down. Again, we're not quite sure what this stuff is, assuming it's buffing Shadow Orbs, maybe, but who knows. So for now, I'll just take Damnation cooldown as like probably what we're going to want for single target. Okay, now we've unlocked the bottom section of our tree. Right away, you might have noticed, here's Void Eruption. So we still have Void Eruption. Still part of our kit. Still works the way it did before. Meaning it gives you Mastery activation when you use it. And then you get access to Void Bolt. So all of that is the same. The problem is, that means you can have 2 2-minute cooldowns here. And 3 if you count Power Infusion. So it's just kind of a weird overlapping of cooldowns because you can pick up both. Both of them have a cast time, so it's just they don't really play together, and they kind of want different things out of the kit. Although the nice part is Void Eruption does activate our mastery, so even if we're inside of Dark Ascension, maybe we're hitting Mind Spike and our dots are falling off, you're not actually losing the mastery activation from that if you also press Void Eruption. So the cooldown path is kind of odd because you're like, I'll press Dark Ascension, then go into Void Eruption. So you're kind of doing 2 back-to-back casts, PI, and then unloading. It's kind of overwhelming. So yeah, I think they should kind of rethink either your ability to pick up both of them at once. Should they combine together if you pick up both? Should they be a choice node? Something like that, because right now they don't feel like they mix well together, but they're so close in the tree and so powerful that you're going to want to mix them together if you can. So I definitely feel like that's a point of improvement here. You still can talent into Ancient Madness as a 2-pointer now, and then Hungering Void or Surrender to Madness. But you're just kind of buffing a secondary cooldown. It's hard because Dark Ascension is kind of new and shiny, but Void Eruption is very different now. It feels like the main reason why it feels like that is they've also nerfed Void Bolt. Void Bolt's cooldown is now significantly, I think they doubled its cooldown. So you're only casting like 2 or 3 Void Bolts in your 15-second Void Form window now. That's how long the cooldown is. You're only going to get a couple of them. Now, obviously, if you take Hungering Void, they did buff the kind of extension of this. So you'll maybe be able to fit in an extra 1 or 2 with Hungering Void. But the kind of playstyle of Void Form is so different than it used to be. I think I'd rather just see it get removed than let it stay in the state. I mean, we're missing the kind of aspect of like Void Bolt being kind of like every third GCD in Void Form has been iconic to that cooldown. So getting rid of that just feels super weird. I would rather them kind of rethink this area and kind of add things back, put Void Bolt's cooldown back to where it was, or do something to make it the cooldown of Void Eruption. If you want to talent into that Void playstyle, lean heavily into the Legion playstyle, right? Give us ramping haste, give us ramping dot damage, make Void Torrent extend our Void Form. Like stuff like that feels way more iconic and fun than a kind of really shelled out or empty version of Void Eruption that we had in previous expansions. So definitely feel like this needs a lot of work, especially with the new Dark Ascension mind spiky stuff. But, time will see exactly how we feel about this. So there's that. Now, Derangement. This was what I was talking about earlier. So Derangement increases the initial damage of Devouring Plague by 75%, and then Mindseer deals damage 20% faster. So the Mindseer component is a bit simpler. This basically just means you can consume your insanity faster with Mindseer. Mindseer consumes quite a lot of insanity. It's 25 insanity. Basically every tick is the idea, meaning a full channel of Mindseer almost empties you out completely of insanity if you have a full insanity bar. So you're not like spamming it very often. This just means when you do want to do that Mindseer insanity dump, it's just happening faster. Pretty simple, very nice. And then the other part, why would you want to buff the initial damage of Devouring Plague? Well, the main reason is because if you're inside of Dark Ascension, you want your insanity spender to feel more meaningful than it did before. Because otherwise, you could be, getting rid of it with Mind Spike. And more importantly, Dark Ascension is not buffing the periodic damage of Devouring Plague. So because of this, Derangement is giving you kind of a dump for your insanity that feels more valuable than it would otherwise. So I do think it's a little far away. Like, this is almost like, I feel like if you take Dark Ascension, you always want to have this. So they are a bit far apart from each other. I wish they were, maybe switch these two and then replace Piercing Shadows with something else. I'm not sure, but that definitely kind of closes the loop on why you would want to pick that. So, and then coming over here to the left-hand side, you can choose between Pain of Death, which is kind of like a small version of Psychic Link. So with this kind of build, if you're talking about a cleave scenario, it just flat out increases the damage of Shadow Word Death, and then Shadow Word Death deals 20% of its damage to all targets with your Shadow Word Pain on it, which contrasted with Psychic Link, which was updated to be Mind Blast and Mind Spike deal, it's either 15 or 30% of its damage to all targets affected by your Vampiric Touch. So our Aoe rotation is kind of filling out now, where you'll kind of use Shadow Crash, Dark Void, Misery, put your dots on the target, and then you're basically going to execute your single target rotation on something and get kind of cleave spread damage from Mind Blast, Mind Spike, and then Shadow Word Death if you want to talent into that. And then you dump your insanity with Mindseer. It's kind of how that playstyle is working out. Very interesting. I haven't played with it myself in a dungeon on beta. Hoping to do that really soon to just kind of see how it plays. But I'm very interested and kind of intrigued. Seems a lot better than what we had with Searing Nightmare. So we'll see. The other option you can pick on this choice node is Mind Flay Insanity. Feels kind of out of place. Like you're either choosing between Shadow Word Death, like offset cleave, or buffing your Mind Flay. I guess Mind Flay is a single target option versus this kind of cleave option. But this is casting Devouring Plague, transforms your Mind Flay spell into Mind Flay Insanity for 5 seconds, which deals more damage, 80% more damage than Mind Flay. Not a big fan of things buffing our filler. I think that's something they said they wanted to avoid, but they did it with this talent. It's not currently working, at least for me, on beta, so it's hard to really give feedback on it. But overall, it feels pretty out of place here. So hopefully they look at changing that or removing it. And then let's kind of see what else we would want to pick up here. You still have the Mind Devourer proc, which I think is a nice little loop of like, if you're inside of Dark Ascension, you can get more, Devouring Plagues for free, which then can cause other procs to happen, effectively avoiding when you might want to hard cast Mind Spike more, which feels good. Can also pick up Insidious Ires, which was the old Talbadar's legendary. Mastermind is a new talent. Increases the critical strike chance of Mind Spike and Mind Blast by 3%, and increases their critical strike damage bonus by 15%, which is pretty sweet. It goes up to 3 and 6%. So again, more crit scaling on our spells. You get more of these kind of procs with Mind Spike and Mind Blast with each other. All kind of plays into itself. And if you pay attention, this is 6% critical strike chance of Mind Blast. You're getting really close to Mind Blast, critting almost 100% of the time with these Mind Spike stacks that you're generating up. So kind of an interesting gameplay loop, right? They're trying to really incentivize you to having fun pressing Mind Spike, which I do like. Couple other things to talent into here. You do have Idol N'Zoth, which is still unchanged. I wish there was some bad luck protection to make it a bit easier to use, but it's available there. Or you can pick Lunacy, which is reduces the insanity cost of Devouring Plague by 10, so it's a 40 insanity cost, and also reduces the insanity drained when Mindseer deals damage by 5, meaning Mindseer will not consume as much insanity to do the same amount of damage it would otherwise. Not a big fan of this talent. It feels kind of lame, and honestly doesn't change how you play that much. Like, in the grand scheme of things, this might let you fit like one more Devouring Plague in your cooldown window, maybe 2. It's still pretty tiny though. And you know, reducing insanity drain by Mindseer, you know, you're saving yourself like, you know, 20 insanity for every full channel of Mindseer. It could add up over time, but definitely a bit more of a lame option, especially in comparison to Idol of N'Zoth, which is much more exciting in my opinion. So hopefully they address that. So in single target here, you know, unfortunately, you know, going down Void Eruption is probably going to be the most damage right now, just because of it being an extra cooldown. Maybe even picking up Talbotars and kind of finishing out something like this. Although depending on tuning, you do have some other options down here. So Monomania, while channeling Mind Flayer or Mindseer, tick rate of Vamp Touch and Shadow Pain on your current target is increased by 25%, and they get 3% more crit chance. This is a 2-pointer talent, so I got to get some more stuff to get over here. So you do have to pick Pain of Death or Mindbender to get down here. So it goes from 25% to 50% on the tick rate damage, and then crit chance up to 5%. So nothing to scoff at. It's quite a lot, but again, it is while channeling Mind Flay, Mindseer. So again, buffing our fillers, not my favorite. And you come down here to Painbreaker's Psalm, which is the legendary in Shadowlands that very few people used. Not a big fan of this coming back. It's Shadow Death is consuming parts of your dots and dealing that damage instantly. I kind of get it in the sense of like, you want to kind of, when you're executing a target, you know, you want to consume your dots to get that damage instantly. I don't know. I think I'd rather consume all the dots and just do the damage instantly if that's what they wanted it to go for. But I think because it's like generating insanity, it's going to be kind of a rotational element where it's like you will press Shadow Death on cooldown with this, and then you have to redot more often. So not a big fan of that gameplay loop. I wish they would consider removing this or replacing it with something else personally. And that lets you come down to the final thing that we haven't discussed yet is Idol of Cthulhu or Idol of Yogg-Saron. Again, these idols are unchanged. There's quite a lot of problems with both. Idol of Cthulhu is also effectively nerfed because Mindseer is no longer a filler spell, so getting procs in AoE is going to be a little harder than usual. So I hope that they adjust the proc rates of this in general, but especially because of that Mindseer change. So a lot of these are kind of the options on the bottom of our row are not a whole lot of playstyle changes, to be honest with you. So not sure if that's intended, but there's not as much going on with these as there is in kind of the middle section of the tree. So it's going to kind of come down to numbers a little bit here. And again, the kind of feels like they're kind of going on different tracks across the tree, and you know, some of these like thoughts don't mix well together. So I think they honestly just need to like remove some options, clean up some pathing, and just make it more elegant more than anything, because it's kind of hard to have like a full cohesive thought of a build and like follow that through the tree and have it feel cohesive. The main problems here are the kind of Dark Ascension Void Eruption combination that needs, I think, the most work, as well as, you know, does Mind Spike make sense in this new kind of playstyle, make sense with our existing mastery? That's something I think that still needs to be worked out, as well as there are a lot of procs and like maintenance buffs and things kind of playing off of each other. I believe there's 7 procs and like buff maintenance now. In Shadowlands we have just Dark Thoughts, right? So quite a lot to play off of. So I kind of hope that they reel some of this in a little bit. You know, maybe merging Mind Melt with Vampiric Insight a little bit, some things like that. And there's a couple smaller things, like we're still kind of missing Shadow specific utility here that's unique to Shadow that Disc Unholy doesn't have, things like that. A couple lackluster talents here and there. Overall, I think it is an improvement over what we have. There is definitely some more promising stuff in here, but I think it still needs work to kind of get it into an ideal state, at least in my opinion. This video has gone super long. Thank you for sticking with it if you've been with me the whole time. But look forward for the feedback getting posted on the forums, and let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and we'll catch you in the next video. Thank you for watching.